A security camera. Grainy. Black and white. A dark sedan pulls into an empty parking lot beside a public swimming pool in a small Missouri town. It's just past 7 a.m. The pool is closed for the season. There is no reason for anyone to be here. The car sits still for a moment. Then a door opens. A man steps out. He's still wearing hospital scrubs. He has just finished an overnight shift in the emergency room, saving lives, joking with nurses, doing the job he has done for 2 decades. He should be going home. Instead, he leaves his car unlocked. His wallet stays inside. His phone goes quiet. And then, according to investigators, he simply walks out of frame and into a mystery that would consume a small Ozark community, spawn true crime forums across the internet, and leave a family divided over a single, agonizing question. Did Dr. John Forsyth take his own life, or did someone take it from him? 9 days later, a kayaker paddling across a lake 45 minutes away would find the answer to where he was. The answer to what happened to him would take almost a year longer, and even then, not everyone would accept it. This is the story of the missing hours before a doctor's death. To understand why John Forsyth's disappearance shook an entire region, you first have to understand who he was. Because on paper, Dr. John Forsyth was the last person anyone expected to vanish under mysterious circumstances. He was 49 years old, an emergency room physician at Mercy Hospital in Cassville, Missouri, a small town of roughly 3,000 people tucked into the Ozark Mountains, about 40 miles from the tourist strip of Branson, and just a few miles from the Arkansas state line. In a community that size, everybody in Cassville had either been treated by Dr. Forsyth or knew someone who had. Colleagues described him as the kind of doctor patients remembered. He teased the nursing staff to ease tension during brutal overnight shifts. He rarely missed a day of work in over 20 years at the hospital, a fact his family would repeat over and over in the days after he disappeared, because to them, it was proof that something was deeply wrong. When he was on call, he didn't even bother driving home. He kept a small RV parked in the hospital lot and slept there between shifts, ready to be back at a patient's bedside within minutes. He was also, by every account from those who knew him, a devoted father. He had 8 children. His family described a man who was warm, funny, whip-smart, and endlessly generous. The kind of person, his sister Gina Forsyth Farlano would later say, that she had spent her whole life bragging about. But Forsyth's life extended well beyond the emergency room. Along with his brother Richard, he had co-founded a cryptocurrency company. The venture had made him, by some accounts, a multimillionaire, an unusual detail for a small-town ER doctor, and one that would become central to the theories swirling around his disappearance. And in the spring of 2023, Forsyth's personal life appeared to be turning a corner. He had recently finalized a divorce, his second split from the same woman, after the couple had previously divorced and remarried. The new divorce decree required him to pay $19,000 a month in alimony and child support. Just days after that finalization, he proposed to his girlfriend. By every outward measure, John Forsyth was a man building a new chapter of his life. A father, a fiancé, a physician respected in his community, a successful entrepreneur. So when he disappeared without a trace on the morning of May 21st, 2023, almost no one who knew him believed it was something he had chosen to do. Almost no one, except perhaps for a few unsettling comments he'd made in the past that nobody had thought much of at the time. To reconstruct what happened to John Forsyth, investigators, and later his own family, had to work backward from a single, chilling fact. The last confirmed sighting of him alive was captured on a low-quality security camera, and even that sighting was disputed for months. Let's walk through what is actually known. On the night of May 20th into the morning of May 21st, Forsyth worked his usual overnight shift in the emergency room at Mercy Hospital in Cassville. Nothing about the shift was reported as unusual. He finished around 7 a.m., the same time he always did. That morning, he sent a text message to his fiancée. The message was brief and, by his brother's account, entirely ordinary. He told her he'd just wrapped up his shift and that he'd see her soon. It was the kind of message anyone sends at the end of a long night. Nothing about it suggested he was in danger. Nothing about it suggested he was planning to disappear. And then, nothing. No more messages. No phone calls answered. No John. His RV was still parked at the hospital. His routine, unbroken for 20 years, had suddenly stopped. Hours passed, then a full day. Forsyth did not show up for his next shift, something his family insisted had never happened before, not once in 2 decades. Concern turned into alarm. His family and colleagues began trying to reach him, and when nothing worked, they turned to local police. That's when investigators pulled security footage from a public swimming pool parking lot in Cassville, roughly half a mile from the hospital where Forsyth worked. The footage showed a dark-colored vehicle pulling into the lot early that same morning. The quality was poor, so poor that investigators would later describe what they saw as little more than a black blur on the screen. But the detail that mattered wasn't the clarity of the image, it was what didn't happen next. The car pulled in, and the car never pulled back out. When officers checked, they found Forsyth's own vehicle sitting in that lot, unlocked, his wallet still inside. But John Forsyth himself was gone. According to investigators' working theory, he had gotten into a second vehicle in that same lot and driven away from it. Who was driving that second vehicle? Where did it go? For months, nobody could say. This is the blank space at the center of the case. The missing hours between a man finishing a hospital shift and a man's body being pulled from an Arkansas lake more than a week later. And it's the space where every theory about John Forsyth's fate would eventually have to find its footing. Within days, what had started as a missing persons case in a small Ozark town became a story with national attention. A task force involving Cassville police and other regional authorities worked to trace Forsyth's movements, but the investigation moved slowly. Local law enforcement in southwestern Missouri had no shortage of manpower or motivation. Forsyth was too well known, too well liked, and his family too vocal. But they had remarkably little hard evidence to work with. A grainy video. An empty car. A man who had simply stopped existing, as far as anyone could tell, somewhere between a hospital parking lot and a public pool. For 9 days, Forsyth's family waited in a state of suspended dread that anyone who has ever waited for news about a missing loved one will recognize: the impossible task of holding out hope while quietly preparing for the worst. Then, on May 30th, 2023, a kayaker paddling on Beaver Lake, a large reservoir that straddles the Missouri-Arkansas border in the Ozarks, spotted something in the water. The kayaker called 911 at 4:43 in the afternoon. It was John Forsyth. His body was recovered from Beaver Lake in Benton County, Arkansas, roughly 20 miles, and by some accounts as much as 45 minutes drive from the last place he had been seen alive in Cassville. That evening, Forsyth's family was gathered together for dinner, extended family and John's fiancée among them, when state police arrived at the door. His brother Richard would later describe the moment as one that blew apart every theory the family had been clinging to. They had hoped, against the growing dread of 9 sleepless days, that wherever John was, he had gone there to protect himself, and possibly to protect the people around him from some kind of danger. The discovery of his body ended that hope in an instant. But it also opened a far darker and more complicated chapter of the investigation, because an autopsy would soon reveal that John Forsyth had not simply died, he had been shot. The Benton County Sheriff's Office confirmed that Forsyth had died from a gunshot wound. At first, officials would not say where on his body the wound was located, or whether the shooting had been self-inflicted. That silence, deliberate, procedural, aimed at protecting the integrity of an active investigation, left a vacuum. And into that vacuum rushed 2 entirely opposite theories, one from each side of the same grieving family, and eventually from millions of strangers online. Richard Forsyth, John's brother and business partner, was unequivocal from the beginning. He believed his brother had been murdered. Detectives who visited the family the evening the body was found told them, according to Richard, that they were treating the death as a homicide, though he was also cautioned that the autopsy had not yet been finalized and no official report had been issued. Richard would later tell reporters, bluntly, that he could give a TED Talk on why he did not believe his brother had killed himself. It's worth pausing here to understand why Richard felt so certain. Just 3 days before he vanished, John Forsyth had proposed to his girlfriend. Days before that, according to the family, he'd had a long, warm dinner with Richard, telling his brother that he loved him and that he couldn't imagine having a better brother in his life. To Richard, these were not the words or actions of a man contemplating the end of his own life. They were the words of a man planning a future. But there was another layer to the family's suspicion, one rooted not in sentiment, but in something far more concrete: money and fear. In the days following Forsyth's disappearance, a story surfaced that stunned even his closest family members. a story from more than a year earlier that, until now, almost no one had known about. According to Richard Forsyth, in February of 2022, over a year before his brother vanished, John Forsyth had been kidnapped. Details were sparse, but chilling. Richard described his brother being zip-tied, driven somewhere cold, taken to a bridge, and made to feel that his life was in danger. And then, for reasons that were never made entirely clear, he was released. No police report was ever filed. Why would a man who had just survived an apparent kidnapping not go to the police? The answer, according to Richard, was tangled up in the same venture that had made John Forsyth wealthy, the cryptocurrency business the two brothers had built together, a company called Onfo LLC. Cryptocurrency, by its nature, exists in a financial gray zone. Vast sums of money can move across the world in seconds, often outside the reach of traditional banking oversight, and often attracting the attention of people willing to use intimidation or violence to get access to it. Richard said his brother had, on more than one occasion, made comments that in hindsight sounded like warnings. John had talked about scenarios, contingency plans, in case something happened to him. At the time, these comments seemed like the kind of dark humor or overly cautious planning that entrepreneurs sometimes indulge in. After his disappearance, they sounded like something else entirely. When this story broke publicly, months into the investigation, it reframed the entire case for many people following along. Suddenly, this wasn't just the story of a beloved small-town doctor who had vanished. It was the story of a man who had allegedly been abducted once already, and who may have crossed paths, as Richard put it, with people he never told his family about. Social media speculation exploded. True crime communities poured over every detail of the case, connecting the 2022 kidnapping to the 2023 disappearance, building elaborate theories about crypto scams, debt disputes, and organized threats. And for a long time, no one in an official capacity said anything to confirm or deny any of it. One of the most frustrating elements of the Forsyth case, for the family, for the media, and for the public following it online, was just how little official information was released in the months after the body was recovered. The Benton County Sheriff's Office, which had jurisdiction over the location where the body was found in Arkansas, was working alongside Missouri authorities, but for a long stretch of 2023, the public was told almost nothing concrete. No confirmed manner of death, no confirmed cause beyond gunshot wound, no suspects named, no timeline of Forsyth's final hours released. This silence was, in one sense, standard procedure. Investigators routinely withhold details in an active case to protect the integrity of their work and to avoid tainting a future prosecution, if one becomes necessary. But for a case that had already captured national headlines, the silence read very differently to the public. It read like a mystery with no answers, feeding endless speculation. By the fall of 2023, months after Forsyth's death, journalists were still describing the case in stark terms, steeped in mystery and speculation, with authorities simply not talking. Meanwhile, Forsyth's family continued to search for their own answers, sharing what pieces of information they could: the kidnapping, the surveillance footage of the black blur in the pool parking lot, the fact that his RV never moved from the hospital lot, while carefully avoiding anything that might compromise the ongoing investigation. It would take nearly a full year for the official conclusion to arrive, and when it did, it would satisfy almost no one. In April of 2024, 11 months after John Forsyth's body was pulled from Beaver Lake, the Benton County, Arkansas, Sheriff's Office released a statement. The chief medical examiner at the Arkansas State Crime Lab had completed the autopsy. The conclusion: suicide. According to the Sheriff's Office, Forsyth died from a gunshot wound to the head, and detectives had found nothing in their investigation to contradict the medical examiner's finding. Investigators revealed a new piece of evidence that had not been public before: surveillance footage showing Forsyth riding a bicycle from a park toward the Lost Bridge area of Beaver Lake in the days surrounding his death. A bicycle, matching the one seen in that footage, was later found near the location where his body was recovered. The Sheriff's Office was careful to leave the door open. Their statement noted that if new, relevant physical evidence emerged, it would be investigated on a case-by-case basis, an acknowledgement that even they understood how unusual and unresolved so many elements of this case remained. For a story that had been fueled for nearly a year by theories of cryptocurrency conspiracies, kidnappers, and unnamed enemies, the ruling of suicide landed like a gut punch to a family that had spent that entire year building a public case for murder. Richard Forsyth's reaction wasn't recorded in the immediate aftermath of the announcement, but the family's position on the ruling would not soften. If anything, what came next would deepen the divide between the official record and the story the Forsyth family believed to be true. Roughly 6 months after the suicide ruling, in October of 2024, the Benton County Sheriff's Office released its full investigative report, a much more detailed accounting of what detectives had pieced together in the year and a half since Forsyth's death. And it was in this report that the case took its strangest, and in many ways its saddest, turn. Investigators wrote that John Forsyth had been living what they described as a secret life, one unknown to most of the friends and family who thought they knew him best. The report detailed a pattern of behavior in the days before Forsyth's disappearance that, viewed in isolation, might have seemed like nothing more than a man in love, embracing a hopeful new chapter of life. But viewed through the lens of the investigation, took on a much heavier, more painful meaning. According to Richard's own account to investigators, in the days before he vanished, John had been unusually tender with the people around him. He was giving out expensive gifts. He was telling people close to him that he loved them, in ways that stood out as different from his usual demeanor. 3 days before his disappearance, he proposed to his pregnant girlfriend. 4 days before that, he had the emotional dinner with Richard, the one where he told his brother he couldn't imagine having anyone better in his life. At the time, these moments were interpreted by the family as signs of a man excited about his future. In hindsight, and in the language investigators used in their report, they began to look like something else. The kind of quiet, deliberate goodbyes that sometimes precede a person's decision to end their own life. The investigative report went further, concluding that Forsyth had not simply died by suicide. He had staged the scene of his death to look like a murder. This was, by any measure, one of the most difficult conclusions imaginable for a family already devastated by loss. It suggested that in his final days, John Forsyth had not only been suffering silently from something he told no one about, but that he had made a series of deliberate choices, riding a bicycle to a remote area near the lake, leaving his car in a pool parking lot, allegedly attempting to make his death look like it was the result of violence that were designed specifically to prevent his loved ones from ever knowing the full truth. If the sheriff's office's conclusions are accurate, then the mystery that captivated true crime audiences online for over a year, the kidnapping, the crypto conspiracy theories, the murder speculation, may have been, in the most tragic sense, exactly what John Forsyth intended people to believe. Even with the sheriff's office's investigative report made public, the Forsyth family has not accepted the official conclusion. Family members have said publicly that despite the medical examiner's finding of suicide, they continue to believe that whoever was responsible for John's death is still out there. In the time since the report's release, the family has launched a series of videos on social media specifically to question the findings, laying out, in their own words, why they believe the investigation reached the wrong conclusion. They have declined to discuss their reasoning on camera with local news outlets, choosing instead to make their case directly to the public through their own channels. Benton County's prosecuting attorney Josh Robinson has acknowledged just how unusual this case is. Speaking to a local news outlet, Robinson said there are, in his words, many unusual things about the Forsyth case, an unusually candid admission from a prosecutor about a file that, officially, is closed. Robinson has also acknowledged that the door is not fully shut. He has said it would not surprise him if new information emerged down the road that pointed toward a different conclusion, evidence that could reopen what is currently a closed investigation. For now, though, the sheriff's office is standing behind the medical examiner's determination. Detectives, Robinson has said, have found nothing in their own work that contradicts the finding of suicide. But he has been clear that any closed investigation can be reopened if genuine new evidence surfaces. That tension, a family publicly refusing to accept an official ruling, and a prosecutor publicly acknowledging the case's strangeness even while defending the investigation's conclusion, is where the story of John Forsyth currently stands. Even accepting the official ruling of suicide, staged to resemble a homicide, the case of John Forsyth leaves behind a long list of questions that may never be fully answered. What happened during the alleged 2022 kidnapping? And was it connected in any way to his death the following year? No police report was ever filed at the time, which means there is little for investigators to formally examine beyond Richard's secondhand account. What was the nature of the danger John Forsyth reportedly referenced on several occasions before his death? Was it tied to his cryptocurrency business, to personal struggles that he kept hidden even from those closest to him, or to something else entirely that died with him? Why did he choose the specific, elaborate sequence of actions that investigators believe he took? Driving to a pool parking lot, apparently switching to another vehicle or continuing on foot or by bicycle, traveling toward a lake nearly an hour from his last known location. If the sheriff's office is correct that this was a deliberate staging, what does that reveal about the state of mind of a man who, by every external account, seemed to be stepping into the happiest chapter of his life? And perhaps most hauntingly, what was the secret life investigators referenced in their report? The phrase itself is loaded with implication, but the public report does not spell out every detail of what that secret life entailed, leaving space for both legitimate concern and continued speculation. These are not questions with tidy answers. They are the kind of questions that a family carries for years, replaying conversations, searching old text messages, wondering if there was a warning sign they missed, or wondering if the official story, however carefully investigated, simply isn't the whole truth. It's worth stepping back from the forensic details and the competing theories to remember what this case actually is, underneath all of it. The story of a man who is gone, and a family left to make sense of how. John Forsyth was, by every account from the people who loved him, a father of 8 children, a man who had rebuilt his personal life after a difficult divorce, and a physician who spent 2 decades treating patients in a small town that trusted him completely. Whatever happened in his final days, whether driven by hidden despair, outside threats, or some combination the full truth of which may never surface, the result was the same devastating loss for the people who knew him. His fiancée was pregnant with his child when he died. His children lost their father. His siblings lost a brother they describe, even now, as someone they deeply admired. And his community lost a doctor who, by every telling, showed up for them again and again for 20 years, until one morning in May, when for the first time, he didn't. The story of John Forsyth resists the kind of clean resolution true crime audiences often crave. There was no trial, no arrest, no single villain unmasked in a dramatic final act. Instead, there is an official finding that most of the public has never fully seen in complete detail, a grieving family that continues to reject that finding on the public record, and a small Ozark town that watched one of its most trusted residents disappear into a mystery that, even now, refuses to fully close. If the sheriff's office is right, then John Forsyth's death is a profound reminder of how invisible some forms of suffering can be, how a man can be surrounded by love, success, and a hopeful future, and still be fighting something no one around him could see. It's a reminder that the outward signs we often rely on to gauge whether someone is okay, a marriage proposal, a warm family dinner, a thriving career, are not always reliable measures of what's happening beneath the surface. If the Forsyth family is right, then somewhere out there is an unresolved act of violence against a man who spent his life trying to save others, and the person responsible has never been named. 2 outcomes. Only one of them is officially recorded. Neither one brings John Forsyth back. What remains are the missing hours, the drive to a closed pool, the unlocked car, the wallet left behind, the ride on a bicycle toward a lake, a sequence of small, deliberate movements that only one person ever fully understood. And he never got the chance, or perhaps never intended to explain them. If you or someone you know is struggling, the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is available 24/7 by calling or texting 988 or online at 988lifeline.org.